Hello everyone. Just while everyone gets kit out with their headsets, just like to introduce myself. My name is Jason McBride. I'm from Citigroup Belfast. First of all, I'd like to thank Tom for setting this up and asking us along today. The panel today will be discussing the future of software development and the practices as we see it. The group today, I'll let them introduce themselves in a minute when they're all settled. But we've got a good spread from the large corporations of Microsoft to the startup companies of JAR Technologies. I hope the conversation today will control in a certain manner. We have 25 minutes for our initial discussions, which will hopefully cover what we see as the future and how it may change for the likes of different companies that are looking for solutions. What we think that will be, in the, what will be the practices, how we think it'll change, and hopefully some of the value that technology can deliver. So everyone's settled here. I'd like to start by first asking Will to introduce himself. Tell us a little about it.
Hi, how's it going? So my name's Will Hamill. I'm a technical architect with Kainos. Been with Kainos about 5 years, and I'm currently working on projects, a government digital project in the UK for the Common Agricultural Policy.
Good stuff. My name is David Anderson. I work for Liberty IT. I'm the Director of Technology. Been with Liberty about 7-8 years. I'm working about almost 20 years in IT. I suppose I've been working on a lot of e-commerce type stuff, and I'm just doing a lot of sort of strategic stuff.
My name is James Hunter. I'm the CEO of JAR Technologies. We're a startup company. It's in our 3rd year now. We develop application performance testing tools, basically to make sure applications work when they're deployed out into the real world. My background's from software engineering, and I'm currently involved in both the development and the business activities of the company.
My name's Roy Wilson. I'm a solution architect. I work with Microsoft Consulting Services. From an Ireland perspective, Microsoft are both north and south. We're a single entity from a sales, marketing, and services perspective. So my background is software development. That's what I've done for all my career, pretty much. And these days, I'm in a solution architect role where I'm working more with customers in a oversight and guidance role and design. And I'd work across the UK and Ireland primarily.
Okay, thank you guys. Okay, to start off the discussion today, I'd like to first ask a bit, how do you think lessons from the past impact the future practices we use? Start with David.
It's a good question. I think it's something that's quite hard to look back and see what had happened in the past in software development. I mean, certainly you can see what's happened in the past few years, but actually go back into the 80s, 70s, 60s. There's a lot of really good practice. You talk about Agile. Agile is great. But a lot of the agile sort of methodologies, the roots of those things are maybe decades old. It's just until we sort of wrap it up into a nice buzzword and throw it out that people actually start looking at it. So when you actually do start to read a lot of the books and work from the past, you realize that a lot of the practices we do today are not new at all. So I think actually trying to teach people today what has gone on before, or actually what's genuinely sort of disruptive and new, is a challenge. So I suppose to quickly answer the question, there's a huge amount of value in what we've done in the past, but actually distilling that down to the people who work in software development today is a challenge.
Okay. Right, from Microsoft's perspective, what would you like to add?
I kind of agree with that point generally. I think that Agile will continue to evolve and there'll be variants as we move forwards. The themes that are in Agile, I think, are about good communication, about having a closer link with the business, and having people in development roles that can actually communicate well, so that product evolves to meet requirements. And I think there's core things, regardless of whether it's Scrum or whatever's next. Some of the tenets of Agile and the core principles will stand in good stead moving forwards.
One other thing on that front, what do you think we could learn from, when we look back at this, we talk about disruptive practices versus good practices. What do you think we can learn from that? Will?
I think that a lot of the time whenever we discover new practices, or we more often even rediscover old practices, we kind of find that everything old is new again. So sometimes we have something that seems to genuinely change the way that we've worked. So for example, the advent of mobile technology that really brings computing to consumers wherever they are. You know, it brings computers out of a dusty office. You know, that kind of thing really kind of drastically changes the way that we work in technology, and some of the stuff that we do is things that we either rediscover or forget and rediscover again, or have only really changed the way that we've worked in a subtle way, but persist. You know, things like, I mean, we've mentioned agile practices that have been around for some time. You know, iterative approaches, things like the extreme programming practices have not massively changed everyone's daily life, but now seem to have somehow become simply a part of good software practice. And yet the difference in for example, something that's kind of less disruptive and more iterative in that is quite different to, for example, the likes of mobile, where we now have a completely new ecosystem. We have loads of different frameworks, programming languages, you know, developers who can spend their entire careers working solely in mobile, you know, a platform that didn't exist, you know, really didn't exist 10 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, from a sort of early stage startup company, I mean, disruptive technologies is what you're primarily interested in. You're looking at these technologies in a way to bring them to your customers in terms of features and products, and iterate the software in such a way that it brings good value to the business. But you always go back to the underlying theme that you have to look at certain areas such as the security. It always has to be there, the security of application products. It never goes away regardless if it's now or 10 years' time. Looking at the ability to iteratively develop software and continue to deliver features and functionality without engineering problems in. I mean, moving to disruptive technologies has the ability to get you into certain positions, which makes it very hard to engineer your way out of. So it's looking at it at both an engineering point of view, but also at a business point of view, and seeing the benefits.
Yeah, that's a great point. Just quickly, I mean, I think when you think that the cloud stuff is really disruptive, it changes the business completely. I think some of the engineering practices are quite similar. You know, one of the things that's doing a buzz at the minute is sort of reactive programming. We talk about reactive programming. It's fantastically sort of, you know, exciting and stuff, but when you look at it really, it's just resiliency, performance, efficiency, maintainability, and you're thinking, well, that's just the old abilities that were always there of good engineering. So it's not really anything new. So it's bringing people back to do things properly. So, and then all of a sudden you find that, well, you should do reactive programming. They put stuff in the cloud, you know, because you can't afford to be too sloppy around your program practices. But we now have a name for this called reactive programming. So really, it's if you were writing C 20 years ago, that's how you'd be writing code. Yeah. You know, so it's not really that disruptive. So it's a very, very disruptive business. But some of the engineering practices are just really good practice.
Just moving forward then, one thing I'd like to bring on to is the cutting edge technologies today. I mean, what's your view on them, and how do you think that's going to change your future development practices? Starting with Roy.
Yeah, I think Gartner talked about this thing called the nexus of forces. So, and there's some good material you can read in that around how social mobility and cloud and information are coming together to really change what people expect of applications. So, you know, and apps ultimately are driven by consumers' expectations. So that platform of the future, as Gartner liked to position it, will be, you know, a mashup of different technologies. And I think the implication from a development perspective is developers need to be much broader. You know, but some of those core sort of skills and principles we talked about in Agile will still be sound regardless of what that platform is. But I think it creates huge challenges for organizations because there's lots of different technical skill sets now that need to be maintained, and you know, organizations need to think about how they build or outsource those, or how they get those.
I mean, if you look at sort of like 7 years ago, I mean, mobile application development, smartphone and tablet development was still in its infancy. It was still a new market, and there wasn't a lot of developers in that. Now you probably find 40–50% of developers are now engaged in some way in doing mobile and app developments. In the near future, we're also going to be looking at, as you say, the convergence of the data, and the Internet of Things is obviously the next big player out there, with you know, the likelihood of it 3 or 4 times the amount of mobile devices. So that's a totally new area of future development that people are going to have to look at in a different way, from mobile, from big data, from existing systems. So there is a lot out there, and it's going to get bigger, and as I say, require much more analytics on it.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, definitely, I mean, we can see from within Liberty Mutual, you're always looking at what is coming along and the way the industry is going with the business that we're in. You certainly see the days of having one huge sort of system is kind of going away in a sense. You need to be very sort of, I suppose, homogeneous is the architecty word they say. So you need to be a lot of good interoperability, make your different systems talk together. There's a nice sort of theory about you'll have your systems of record, which is your old operational systems that will be sort of probably buried away doing your main business. Your systems of engagement, which actually will sort of interact with your users, both internal and external, and then you've effectively got your sort of Internet of Things beyond that, where that's just you're wide open. You can have a lot of things coming into that. So when you start to look at that sort of very cohesive way of building your systems, then you can start to release real business potential. So from your actual business sponsors, that you can then get really innovative in what you can do and what products you can put out. So that sort of way of thinking is definitely something that is starting to become sort of more important. So the actual technologies, although very important, will chop and change. Stuff like responsive web design and stuff is brilliant, but then something else may come along. So, so really trying to have that bigger view of what kind of system you're building, and that system will evolve for years. It's no longer good enough to sort of say, I'll go with this vendor for 3 or 4 years, and then I'll change vendors, and that's just not cutting it anymore.
So just looking back to we have to build to last. Now technologies, the solution, we have to think very carefully about the technologies we're using. Will that be there in 10 years, looking back to disruptive practices and versus good practices?
Absolutely, and you could even say from a technical responsibility, you've got a responsibility for your business customer and your actual end user to build a system that will last. You can jump in with a quick fix and it'll make everyone happy, you'll hit your dates, high fives, but 2 years later you've got to rewrite it again. That's not good enough, it really isn't. So it's one thing that we push within. You need some technical responsibility to build something that will sustain your business. So it's a much more sort of, what you call, it's sort of bigger IT. It's not just doing quick fix, knee-jerk stuff. So that's much harder. You have to be much more sort of considerate in the way you design your systems.
Okay.
Roy, you mentioned being broader in terms of technologies, and I think purely as a software developer, I think that's going to be certainly something that we'll need to take advantage of in the future. I think in the kind of the late 90s, early 2000s, Cold War of Java and .NET left. Basically, it was just a lot of Java developers. There were a lot of .NET developers, and then there were people doing web scripting on the side. Yeah. And I think the future for myself and the rest of us as developers and technologists is the ability to be more of a polyglot programmer. So having more of a varied tool set in your belt, and having the ability to do Java, .NET, Perl, Ruby, Python, whatever it is that the new kind of programs and frameworks for the platforms that we use are. I think it's much more necessary to have a varied skill set and to be able to deploy those skills depending on the needs of the customer, whether that's mobile or cloud or infrastructure or whatever it is. It'll be purely as from a personal, professional perspective, you'll less be able to rely on the fact that I'm a Java developer, I'm a .NET developer. You'll have to be just a good software developer with good transferable skills that you can use across a number of different languages and frameworks, so that you and your business have the flexibility to apply those skills to different contexts for different customers.
Yeah, I'd second that. I think that's incredibly important. I think maybe going back 15, 20 years, people would say, I'm a XYZ expert. That's what I'll do. I'll make my money on that. People would say, I'll be a security programmer. And then people buy a product, and then all of a sudden you have no job. When you think to be able to actually be sort of self-aware and then learn lots of different languages, it'll make you much better at delivering software and much more attuned to the needs of your customer and your technical sort of team. There's also, you could say, it's sort of like design thinking. You got to think about how you put forward your solutions rather than what sort of technology you use. So.
I mean, if you're looking from a point of view, if you look at sort of who you're recruiting these days from a company point of view, I mean, you're looking at people who have skills, but the main part is the design, the ability to understand the higher level design. As soon as engineers get up to that level of looking at the big picture, planning and analysing what they've got in front of them, but also thinking that 2, 3, 5 years down the line of what will this system, what will this architecture have to do in a couple of years' time. Once they have a clear vision of that, then from my point of view, I would call them a complete engineer. They know everything they need to know, and the language becomes irrelevant. Then they can just learn whatever they need.
And just to follow up on Will's point, I think it's not just a language consideration here, because something to think about is the impact of cloud on developer skills. And with the progression of platform as a service, be it on whoever's technology stack, developers will need those sorts of skills to understand what's available at those higher levels of abstraction, to be able to put those into solutions so they deliver benefit quickly to customers.
Yeah. That moves us on to, we've talked about a lot about how we see the developer evolving from being just a Java or a .NET developer to being a technologist. How do we see us mentoring those new developers coming into our organizations to become that true technologist that can move on to any area, jump to the next application as required? Starting with David.
You have to be humble. You have to be humble. I'll quote my computer science A-level teacher. He says, "Show me the man who knows everything and I'll show you the fool." I think sometimes you see new developers who think they know absolutely everything, and you have to say, well, enthusiasm is brilliant. It's absolutely great. But you have to be curious, you have to challenge things, you have to question things. So it's not so much, I think, mentoring a developer to say, this is how to code a certain way, or this is how something works. It's you're almost mentoring the way of thinking, the way you approach things. I think that sort of questioning approach to software development is absolutely critical, that curiosity. Sometimes think there's almost 3 stages of a developer. You learn how to program kind of on your own or at school. So learn how to program that's important. When you start working, you learn how to program with a team of people. You know, work with other people. You write a bit of code, and then you test it, and someone else fixes a defect. And there's almost the next level is how do you actually build solutions for a customer? How do you figure out what someone wants and give that to them? That's the hardest part. And there's lots of great material on that. Like there's a great book, a guy called Jared Weinberg wrote in the 80s about how do you do that. And I think when you start to think of that stuff, but you can't take a developer straight out of college and start telling them this is how to figure out what your business customer needs. There's a number of things they need to get through to get that. So they need that sort of both discipline and curiosity and drive to sort of take them through so they can start actually having those high-level conversations.
From Microsoft's perspective?
I would agree, and I think mentoring is partly about the technology, but also about how you want to run your project, be it agile or waterfall. So it's key to have roles that are senior enough to be able to instill principles and expectations into junior team members, so they sort of adapt that culture and they fit into teams. And I think some of your organizations probably have well-defined paths for developers, how they move through the progression. So it might be useful from Will's perspective to understand what that looks like for you. How do you take a developer through the ranks? Where do they go?
Yeah, well, in Kainos we have a pretty well-defined technical career progression, but the kind of the job bands aside, there are really important skills that you learn as a software developer, like David said, that you need to then build upon. Become the difference between a software developer and a really experienced software developer is what skills do you have and where do you know when to apply those, and what experience can you pass on based on the mistakes that you've made, and can you explain the context for the decisions that were made that led to that? And it's easy to look back and say, oh, we shouldn't have done that, or shouldn't have done these things, or you come to a new project and you look at something and you say, I can't believe we picked this technology, who did that? And you need to understand the context of those things, and actually showing those to people who are new, especially new developers who might come along with new skills and new ideas, which is great and something you want to take advantage of. But having the ability maybe to explain the context of those decisions so that we can pass on the lessons that we've learned, so that they don't keep making the same mistakes that we make, and so that we can try and not continuously do this cycle of rediscovery and forgetting of practices and then rediscovery again.
I think it's a really good point, because one of the things I have seen, and I've worked with lots of customers who develop in different ways, but People who claim to do Agile or variants of Agile, and the bit that they often miss is the retrospective, which is the learning bit. You know, in the Deming cycle, it's they've done something, now you want to measure it and learn from it and improve. And it's often the thing that you start off with good intentions, but falls by the wayside due to pressures. And unless you've got a good rigor and you've got people who've done that before and trodden the path, to help you, then that's something you can easily fall.
So it's basically getting your juniors to learn their mistakes sooner in their careers rather than...
Maybe if we can learn to remember the lessons that we've already learned and not forget them when we're passing them on. I mean, you mentioned the Deming cycle, understanding the importance of retrospectives. The retrospective in Agile sense is a very new term, but the understanding of having to go back on some work that we've done and learn from whether or not we can do it better is ancient. And yet we still seem to go through this cycle of somehow losing that knowledge and then rediscovering it.
I mean, the panel, we all agree that there has to be a process in place to take the juniors through. There's another part of looking at the actual human element of it and the actual engineers themselves. Some of them have different passions. Some of them want to go off and do the visual side of things. Some want to get more involved in the back end and the big data side of things. So I think it's also important to look at what their real interests are and their kind of real, passion is behind it, and seeing if that can be taken into consideration as you try to grow them and teach them.
I think as well, just a quick point, that I think failing fast is incredibly important. Like instilling that, and that's not something people think, I want to do the right thing, or I want to be correct. It's like, you need to make mistakes, you need to fail, but you need to be empowered and have a trust and support there, that someone will maybe, not really catch that, but you bounce that off someone and you can fail in a safe environment rather than sort of hit the wall, So I was mentoring a couple of master students last year, and one of the things I said to the tutor was, I want these guys to make mistakes. So I'm going to give these guys things and they will make mistakes, and that's part of the project. They need to do that. And it's not that they'll be marked down because of that. They should make mistakes, but what they produce at the end of it will be very good. This won't be a clean run, and that's just having that idea to sort of fail fast and safely, I think, is incredibly important in mentoring.
Okay. So as we look to wrap up, if I could ask you all to maybe give your last view of what you think will be, in your own words, the future of software development. What would it be in 5 years? How do you think it will change from today, and what would your advice be on that? To pick an area in that. James,
Let's start off. I see a continual acceleration of the web into everything. Desktop applications and even apps on your mobiles will move more towards a web deployment. So everything will be your JavaScript, all that kind of language, and along with the big data side of things with the Internet of Things, I think it will require a shift in mentality of how we look at data and security and personal interaction with devices. So that's how I kind of see it going in the next few years.
I suppose, and from Microsoft's perspective, we're undergoing transformation into what essentially was a product company into a company that's focused on devices and services, and that's a huge change. And I guess you only really see the tip of the iceberg from the outside into that world. But that company's strategy is recognizing that people are increasingly doing things on devices. I think the trap we often fall into is, as IT people, we think people buy hardware devices because they like hardware or they like the platform. They buy them to look at pictures of cats, or talk to their friends. So we often forget why people actually use devices. But I think if you recognize that that's a trend, then the implication from a software development perspective are many of the things we've mentioned. It's polyglot programming. It's also awareness of cloud and higher level capabilities that are there, and it's the continuation, I think, of Agile in another form. With some of those core tenets, will still be there. Well, that's my crystal ball anyway.
Yeah, I think it'll be, like we've said, I think it'll be really important to focus on learning, new technologies, new languages, and so on, mostly to teach us new approaches and to learn how better to apply the things that we know, and which scenario is best to actually use this approach. And I think it'll still, though, be probably the soft skills, the talking to people and understanding their problems. That'll still be the hardest. You can learn as many programming languages as you want, and if you write a great application that no one wants to use, it's still a failure. It'll still be fundamentally hard to try and understand people's problems and how to solve them because the gap between the users and the technology is translated by humans.
Yeah.
To finish it off.
I just say, I think collaborative practice is what I would say. I think that's hugely important. I think the way our systems are starting to be written today with what the vendors are doing, it's a much more collaborative space. With platform as a service in the cloud and software as a service, you can build in one platform and use a service from another and use a different API. You can really just plug together stuff with kind of mashups, whatever we're going to call it. I mean, that collaborative way of working is hugely important. So if you think from a systems perspective, it will become more and more open and collaborative. There's lots of talks on that today. And from a personal perspective, you can see developers will need to be much more better at communicating and finding out what their business user wants or what their user wants. And that problem is not really going to get any easier. That will always be the biggest challenge, to actually figure out what do people actually want. Because there's always lots of miscommunication around that. So I think with the collaborative systems and collaborative practice, I think that's just going to get more and more.
Okay. Thank you very much, guys. I'd like to open up to the floor for questions at this point, if anybody has any. Okay.
Tough crowd.
One back.
I just wanted to ask the question. You've talked about polyglot programmers, and you've got to be able to program in all languages. I noticed it was one of the things that came up on the tweet board there as well. Are you genuinely saying you would rather have a jack of all trades rather than a master of one? You were talking about security, and an earlier speaker talked about it's going to be impossible to get data architects. How are you going to get these specialists who are going to fill the specialist roles we're talking about when you're going down the route of polyglot programmers?
I don't think that the role of the specialist is gone by any means. I think what I mean is that we expect, for example, from our software developers and our software engineers to have a bit more breadth of experience. The T-shaped people, people who are not a Java developer, that if we then start a project in another language, will say, I can't work on that project, I only know Java. Someone with an understanding of security, someone with an understanding of analytics, and a bunch of different languages to back that up is going to be really useful to me, as a team lead on a project, or as someone who's looking to recruit software developers. So people who have that breadth, not necessarily a jack of all trades, a master of none. There's certainly use for masters. We're certainly still going to want to talk to security experts for the likes of our penetration testing or for compliance auditing. Maybe a jack of all trades and a master of one is what I'm looking for.
Yeah, I think that's sort of consistent with what they call the generalizing specialist. When you start off your career, you want to be doing lots of different things, to learn lots of things, but as you go on in your technical career, you sort of gravitate towards something that you kind of like, but you can't really say, I'm a front-end guy, I'm not writing any services, I'm not even going to look at it. That's not really acceptable.
Okay. Any other? No, there's one mic down.
Hi there. As I look around, I think I'm one of the oldest IT professionals in this room with 42 years experience in the industry. But I would give you a challenge. I think we have gone down a cul-de-sac. We're all gravitating where we want less people, higher skilled, and we're producing a two-tiered skill level in IT. I'm not sure we can sustain that, and I think we need to find a way of changing track. We need to make it more automatic. We need to be able to have more people with broader skills, but I don't see that we've embraced that at the moment. We're all dependent on a very small population of very highly skilled people, and the second tier is struggling to reach those high levels. I feel we need to do something different, and I appreciate your views on it.
Well, I think the first thing, that may be the case, but events like this is exactly the forum we're trying to create to actually bridge that, make sure that everybody has a forum to communicate on that. I'd like to hear from a startup, James, on that.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose from my point of view, I mean, 20 years ago you had a limited set of languages that you could learn. There was either the very low-level stuff or the UI stuff. And as time has gone on, we've now got like I say, a two-tier system. You have the experts, the guys that are very skilled in a certain technology, a certain field, and then you have a more general developer environment below that. But as anybody knows, trying to hire engineers is nearly impossible in Belfast. There's a very limited resource. So I think some of the ways of looking at it is better education, bringing kids quicker to programming, and that's certainly being done. The likes of Digital Circle and some of those guys are doing great work in that field. But it's also looking at other fields that have highly skilled people that can make that bridge across. I mean, certainly we talked before, and there's people in PhD skill sets maybe off doing biosciences and are looking for something different. These are highly intelligent people that can easily make their way across into software development or hardware development. So I think there's a number of different approaches for doing it. I just don't think we have it really figured out yet of what is the best way to do that, to bridge them across and to help fill that space.
Okay.
Yeah, just very, very quickly on that. I mean, like, we did a lot of work in Liberty with STEM grads, you know, and it's fascinating to see how different an approach some of the STEM guys bring, because it's a lot different than a computer science graduate. But one quick thing, most people who use a computer program in some way. I mean, use Excel, you are programming in a way. So I think we sort of need to bring down the fear factor of programming. So I would certainly say to that, because there's plenty of work to go around, really. You don't need to be a master programmer. I think there's lots of stuff that people can do. So.
Yep. Okay. Unfortunately, I think we've run out of time. We could talk for a lot more on this, but I'd just like to thank the panel for your input today, and thank you everyone else.